There is a moment in life when people stop taking you seriously, not because you said something wrong, not because you failed once, but because slowly, over time, your value in their eyes begins to decrease. Not loudly, not in a way you can clearly see, but in small ways, in how they speak to you, in how they respond, in how they treat your presence. And one day, you notice it, something feels different. You are still the same person, but the way people react to you has changed, and this creates a question. What happened? Why do they not respect me the same way? Why do I feel like I have to prove myself again? And this is where most people make a mistake. They try to fix it immediately. They try to explain themselves. They try to prove their worth. They try to show that they are still valuable. But the more they try, the more they lose, because respect does not return through effort. It returns through perception. And perception is not changed by words. It is changed by behavior, and not loud behavior, but silent behavior, because the most powerful comeback is not the one people hear, it is the one they notice. Respect does not disappear in one moment. It fades through patterns, through repeated behavior, through how you allow yourself to be treated. If you over-explain yourself, people stop listening. If you always make yourself available, people stop valuing your time. If you tolerate behavior that does not match your standards, people assume your standards are low. And over time, this creates an image of who you are. And once that image is formed, people start interacting with you based on it. Not based on your intention, but based on your pattern. When you feel your value decreasing, your instinct is to try harder, to show more, to prove more, to explain more. But trying too hard creates the opposite effect, because it signals something. It signals that you need validation. And when people sense that, they automatically reduce respect, not consciously, but psychologically, because respect is connected to perceived self-control, and self-control is visible in how much you try. The more you chase, the less you are valued. The real shift does not happen outside, it happens inside. Before people start respecting you again, you stop seeking their approval. Before people start valuing you, you stop trying to prove your value. And this shift is silent. It is not announced, it is not explained, it is felt in your behavior, in your energy, and in your presence. One of the first changes in a silent comeback is distance, not emotional withdrawal, but controlled distance. You stop over-explaining, you stop over-engaging, and you stop reacting to everything. And this creates space, and space changes perception. Because when you are always available, you become predictable, and predictability reduces value. But when you create distance, you create uncertainty, and uncertainty creates attention. At the core of respect is self-respect, not what you say, but what you allow, how you respond, and what you tolerate. And when you change what you allow, people notice, not immediately, but consistently. Because boundaries are not words, they are patterns. The most powerful change is silence, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of control. You do not react to everything, you do not respond to every situation, and you do not explain yourself unnecessarily. And this silence sends a message that you are not trying to convince anyone, and that changes how people see you. As you stop chasing validation, your energy changes. You become calmer, more stable, and less reactive. And this creates a different presence. Because people do not just respond to words, they respond to energy, and stable energy creates respect. At this stage, nothing dramatic has happened. You have not proven anything, and you have not said anything new. And yet something has changed. Because your behavior is different, your responses are different, and your presence is different. A confident voice, a simplified worldview, promise of clarity, and a listener ready to stop thinking. The scariest part isn't that this works. The scariest part is how easily it works, because the mind doesn't recognize manipulation. When it feels understood, by the time doubt appears, the decision has already been made. The victim was never found, not because they couldn't be, but because they didn't want to be. And that truth makes people uncomfortable, because it means safety isn't just physical, it's psychological. This story isn't about crime, it's about awareness, about recognizing when confidence replaces curiosity, when certainty replaces questioning, when thinking becomes outsourced, because the most dangerous influence doesn't sound dangerous at all. It sounds calm, reasonable, certain. And once you understand that, you don't just hear words anymore, you hear intention. But there is something even more disturbing about this case. The victim wasn't unintelligent. They weren't naive. They weren't desperate. They were informed. They read books. They followed news. They believed they were rational. And that's exactly why this worked. Because intelligence does not protect you from influence. In fact, it often makes you more confident that you can't be influenced. Psychologists call this the illusion of immunity, the belief that awareness alone is protection. But awareness without vigilance is useless. The manipulator understood this. They never rushed. They never demanded trust. They allowed the victim to arrive at conclusions on their own, or at least to believe they did. This is known as guided reasoning. You don't tell someone what to think. You walk beside them until they reach the destination you already chose. Every step feels voluntary. That's why the victim never resisted. Resistance requires conflict, and there was none. Only agreement, only affirmation, only a calm voice saying, "Yes, exactly." Over time, the victim stopped checking reality against other perspectives. Why would they? Everything already made sense. This is when isolation begins. Not physical isolation, psychological isolation. Friends sound confusing. Family sounds emotional. Opposing views feel irrational. The manipulator becomes the clearest voice in the room, not because they are loud, but because everyone else sounds uncertain. The human brain trusts confidence more than accuracy. Studies have proven this. People follow leaders who sound sure, even when they are wrong. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. And once doubt is framed as a threat, the mind avoids it. The victim didn't walk away from life. They walked toward clarity, or what felt like clarity. That's the tragedy. The final decision wasn't dramatic. There was no emotional breakdown, no tears, no goodbye letter, just a plan, a simple one. Leave quietly, disconnect cleanly, start over, not because they were running, but because they believed. They were finally thinking clearly. The manipulator didn't suggest disappearance. They suggested freedom, and freedom is a powerful word. Carries no alarm bells, no warnings. Who argues with freedom? That's why this case unsettled investigators. There was no crime scene, because there was no crime in the traditional sense, only a psychological chain of events that led to a physical absence. And the law struggles with what it cannot see, but psychology sees it clearly. This pattern repeats in different forms: high-control relationships, cult recruitment, radical belief systems, different language, same structure. First, reduce complexity, then offer certainty, then isolate doubt, finally redefine freedom. At no point does it feel dangerous. That's why it works. The mind doesn't resist when it believes it has chosen. This case was closed, without answers, but it left behind a warning. Not about strangers, not about criminals, about conversations, about certainty, about how easily the human mind can be guided when it wants relief more than truth. Because the most dangerous influence doesn't look like control. It looks like understanding. And once you recognize that, you stop asking, who would do this? And you start asking something far more important. How would I know if it was happening to me? You choose where to invest your time, you choose where to give your energy, and you choose where to engage and where not to. And this control creates power, because you are no longer reacting. You are directing. Over time, your stability becomes visible, not just in your actions, but in your consistency. You remain the same in different situations, under different conditions. And this stability creates authority, because people trust what is consistent, and they respect what is stable. At this stage, the dynamic changes, not because you forced it, but because you changed your behavior. People adjust to you. They respond differently. They treat you differently. And this shift happens silently, without discussion, without explanation. But the most important change is inside you. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself. You no longer feel affected by how people react. You no longer feel pressure to maintain an image, because you are no longer trying. And that is where real confidence exists. And this is the truth most people never realize. Value is not created by what you say. It is created by what you consistently show, not through effort, but through behavior. And behavior repeated over time becomes identity. And this is the stage where everything becomes clear, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, because by now you have seen the change, not only in others, but in yourself. Your behavior has changed. Your reactions have changed. Your presence has changed. And because of that, everything around you has also changed. The reason this silent comeback works is simple, but often misunderstood. You did not try to control others. You controlled yourself. You did not force respect. You became consistent. You did not demand attention. You changed your behavior, and behavior is what people respond to, not words, not explanations, not promises. Everything started inside. Before people respected you again, you stopped chasing their respect. Before people valued you, you stopped trying to prove your value. And this internal shift, this is what created external change, because the way you see yourself affects how others see you. You stopped explaining yourself, and you stopped justifying your actions, and you stopped trying to be understood by everyone. And this created strength, because people respect clarity, and clarity does not need explanation. At this stage, your confidence is different. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, it is calm, stable, and controlled. And this type of confidence is what people trust, because it is not temporary, it is consistent. People respect you now because your behavior changed. You are less reactive, more controlled, less available, and more selective. And these qualities signal something important, which is self-respect, and people mirror what you show. If you respect yourself, they begin to respect you. Without saying anything, you have created authority, not through power, but through presence. Because authority is not about control, it is about stability, and stability is what people follow. Most people try to come back loudly, they try to prove themselves, they try to show change, and they try to get attention. But loud comebacks create resistance, and silent comebacks create curiosity. Because when you do not explain, people observe, and observation creates impact. This is where everything depends on consistency. If you return to old patterns, respect disappears again, and if you stay consistent, respect becomes permanent. Because people trust what does not change. At this stage, you feel different, not because people treat you differently, but because you are not dependent on it. You are stable, you are clear, you are in control of yourself, and that is where real power exists. And this is the truth most people never fully understand. Respect is not something you ask for, it is something people give based on what they see repeatedly. And what they see is your behavior, your consistency, and your control. You do not need to prove yourself, you do not need to explain yourself, and you do not need to chase respect. Because the moment you control yourself, everything else begins to change. The moment you stop reacting, people start observing. The moment you stop chasing, people start noticing. And the moment you become consistent, people start respecting. So the real question is not how you make people respect you again. The real question is whether you are ready to become the person who does not need their validation. Because once you reach that point, respect is no longer something you seek, it is something that naturally follows. And if this made you understand something deeper, something you could not explain before, then stay aware. Because awareness is what changes everything. And if you want to understand human behavior at a deeper level, make sure you subscribe. Because what you understand, you no longer chase.